So thank you very much for having me at this workshop. It's really a pleasure to talk about food loss and waste and global food systems, the trade-offs and policies. My talk is structured in 4 points. Basically, it's first about the definition and the extent of food loss and waste, then the sustainability benefits from reducing food loss and waste. I'll talk about sustainable trade-offs, policies, and end with some conclusions. Well, the first question is, well, actually, what is food loss and waste? Food loss and waste occurs all along the food supply chain. And in various situations and very different situations. And these pictures, it's just some examples, but they illustrate the diversity of what we could consider food loss and waste. We have, for example, harvest losses. You see apples in an orchard lying there. Well, it seems obvious that is food loss. Post-harvest loss is a bit similar. It should be tubers or vegetables, not really clear, in some sacks lying on the ground. Well, we would say it's food loss and waste. It becomes more difficult on the third picture. We see processing byproducts that should be spent, grain from brewery. Is that food loss and waste? Actually, it has nutritional value, but we usually don't eat that. So it's less clear. But when it is fed to livestock, it provides livestock products, meat, milk. And then we would consider food loss something that is wasted instead of fed. And on the right-hand picture, well, leftover food fed to livestock also produce livestock products. But still, it is food that could have been eaten by humans. I don't go to the other pictures, but these are the discussions that have very much, well, contributed to a stimulating debate about the definition of food loss and waste. And you see that the fate or the destination of surplus food has an impact on what we would understand as food loss and waste. And we have a framework for that, for these different types of destination and management options. And the framework is from the waste policies. For example, the RRR concept: reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduce should be priority, then reuse, and at the end only recycle. In the European context, we rather work with a waste hierarchy. It's not a 3-level, it's a 5-level hierarchy. There is also reuse, preparing for reuse, recovery. These are terms that, well, we are not so much familiar with. But applied to food, it brings us to a hierarchy which is called the food and drink material hierarchy. Well, it's a suggestion. And again, we clearly see that the prevention of food and it's ending up being eaten by humans should be top priority. And then the redistribution to charity would be a second next option. Animal feed comes then. And then these are rather in the waste management field: recycling, recovery. It includes composting, anaerobic digestion, these management options for waste. And at the end, really the worst thing would be landfilling or incineration. So we have this framework in mind, and the discussions about the definition had also this framework in mind. And where we are today, but it's really a result of a decade of debate, is this definition, which says that what is not food loss and waste is anything fed to livestock. And we have to keep in mind that any quantification of food loss and waste does not regard food, surplus food fed to livestock. And what is food loss and waste is the remaining things. Harvest losses should be also, quantification is quite tricky. So usually it's not included either in quantification of food loss and waste today. And then the things that end up in the trash bin or even composted, and it includes surplus food and inedible parts. So this is the framework and the definition of food loss and waste today. It has been formalized by FAO and the United Nations Environmental Program, because they say, we'll talk about this a little bit later, food loss and waste, we have a target that is part of the Sustainable Development Goals. There is a quantitative target. We have to monitor the progress towards the target, so we need this definition framework. And this is what is the outcome of this definition framework. So in line with the definition that I've just showed before, we distinguished food loss on the stages of on-farm transport and processing, so food processing. And we talk about food waste when it's the stages of retail and consumption in home and out of home. And I already said food loss and food waste occur at all these different food supply chains and sections. And the reasons for food loss and waste are manifold, and the situations are really quite diverse. So I have just summarized some of them. But what it tells us directly is that there is not one single recipe for reducing food loss and waste. It's really, well, multiple recipes. And this is very important. Yeah, and food loss and waste occurs at the different food items. I have another slide. I won't go into detail with it. Some words about the extent. That's probably, I mean, there's probably no food loss and waste study that does not mention this study carried out for the FAO in 2011. The first authors are Gustafsson et al. Gustafsson is really famous for this work for the FAO. So published in 2011, it said 1/3 of the global food production is lost and wasted. It showed for the 7 big regions worldwide where the per capita food loss and waste lies. So we have the extremes here with Europe and North America. It's up to 300 kilograms per capita a year of food that ends up uneaten, food loss and waste. With a color code which shows the part of consumption, it's the red part that is food waste at consumption stage, which is high in these areas. And compared to the food production in this area, it makes up 1/3, so it's confirmed for these regions. And then there are other areas, at the other extreme, sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia. The per capita levels are much lower. The food production in the area is lower too, so we again find this 1/3. So, but we must know that at the time of the study, their data was really scarce. So this estimate relies on really a few data, not probably very robust. And recently, the extent of food waste has been confirmed by more recent work, again by FAO and UNEP. And what they did is they gathered all the available literature that has been carried out within almost 10 years. And the extent has been confirmed. Something like, they say, FAO says 14% of global food production is food loss, 17 food waste. So we find again this 1/3. The per capita food waste in high income countries is also something like 180 kilograms per capita a year. It's somewhat similar to what we've seen in the Gustafsson study. Yeah, so it's still 10 years later, a high level. The order of magnitude is confirmed. As I said before, harvest losses are often ignored because it's tricky with data and there's issues with statistics. And the Worldwide Fund was not happy with that and have estimated how much harvest losses should be added. And they say total food loss and waste would amount to 40% if we also counted harvest losses. And well, so here with this huge extent of food loss and waste, is the situation a bit different in Europe? We could estimate that it's a bit different. And this figure here is helpful in the sense because Europe has a mandatory reporting since last year. So the first results were published for the year 2020. And we see that we have a much lower level food loss and waste, 127 kilograms per capita a year. All sectors included except for the harvest losses. It is much lower. I mean, I added these 3 studies next to another. We shouldn't really compare the FAO study from 2011 because the definition has changed. And as I said, it was really first gross estimates. But we have a problem with the data. I think this is the message from the 3 studies I showed. It is a big issue how to estimate really what is the food waste and waste and what the impact is of the decision about the food definition, the food waste loss and waste definition. But well, let's go on and say, well, food loss and waste in mass means that there are resources, emissions associated, and the general message is by preventing and reducing food loss and waste, we can have resource use savings, emission savings, increase social benefits, reduce losses, financial losses from this waste. This is the general idea, and there are studies that really go in this sense. For example, Kumu, who worked with the FAO study from 2011, they have estimated the embedded water use on the left-hand side here in this picture, and showed the total water use, embedded water use for global food production. It's this bar on the right-hand side, and said that 24% of the global water use for food production is embedded in food loss and waste. So there is a potential for, by reducing food loss and waste, well, saving this water. And it's similar with cropland. 23% of the cropland used for food production is used for food that ends up uneaten, that ends up as loss and waste. So there's potential for saving resources. Another look, a bit different in a different perspective, is about embedded environmental impacts and greenhouse gas emissions in particular, also called the carbon footprint. So as you know, I mean, these greenhouse gas emissions are generated all along the food supply chains, and we have different carbon, what we call carbon intensities. Usually we say that on average, livestock products have lower carbon intensities than plant-based products. And this is reflected in this figure here. It's not per capita food waste, it's the contribution of food items to the total. In mass contribution, it's the orange bar. And the embedded greenhouse gas emissions are next to the blue bar. And we can see that in the total food waste, there are food items which have high masses of food loss and waste, like vegetables. We have vegetables. They contribute a lot, almost 30% to the overall food loss and waste. But their carbon intensities are not that high. I mean, they're still high, but not that high. And on the contrast, we have other products like meat, for example. You see, meat does not contribute that much. I mean, it's rather low compared to other food items. But due to the carbon intensities, it's highly emitting. And this is what some authors argued, to say we should not look only at the mass, we should look at the impact on the environment and include this in the policies we design for prevention. They say that should be a guiding principle for policy, because we should remember, sorry, it's really a bit hidden here, 8 to 10% of the total greenhouse gas emissions worldwide would be associated to food loss and waste. And this is something that could be a guiding principle apart from the masses. Yeah, we could go on. I haven't prepared any slides about nutritional value losses, but I mean, this is something that is quite easy to convert mass in nutritional values. We have nutritional tables that are quite complete. I won't spend time on that, and on the financial losses either. I won't spend time on that. I want to go a bit further about, again, the strategy. What should we do? I mean, what should be priority and remain with the greenhouse gas emissions? Because up to now, we've talked about preventing food waste. We have seen in the waste hierarchies that there are other options, which of course are not priority, but still there are some that appear as high, like use as animal feed and of course redistribution to charity. And in this figure here, you see the literature gathered that shows emission, either savings or net emissions for different management options of food waste. It's per ton of food waste managed in different ways. And the color indicate different management options. So the negative values are emission savings, greenhouse gas emission savings. The positives are net emissions. And we can clearly see that overall from this literature review, the waste hierarchy is confirmed, because we see that the biggest, it's this line here, the biggest emission savings are possible through prevention. So luckily it's, yeah, that makes sense. But The other options that are high in the hierarchy also provide savings, especially animal feed. The use of surplus food as animal feed provides savings due to the substitution with original feed production. And the worst thing is confirmed also by these emissions data, incineration and landfilling. Here this is brown and the red bars. And then there are some like composting, the green bars. When they are well managed, they provide savings. When they are badly managed, they could be emissions. So it's less clear, it depends on the techniques of the composting. Perfect. Perfect, because in a way we have the way to go. So we just should keep with this framework and, well, do what is necessary. But there are some authors, and this is really recent work, they say that thinking only in this hierarchy terms completely disregards any market feedback, any market adjustments, any rebound effects, and this is not reality. And so on the next slide, I have gathered a picture. I have done it myself, but on the basis of this paper from Latka and colleagues published last year. And it shows some pathways or possible mechanisms that show outcomes. I mean, we can say sustainability outcomes because they address environmental impacts, social and financial things. And we could a little bit go through them and go through and see when we reduce food loss and waste or valorize food loss and waste, what could happen on the markets and what could happen as reactions of stakeholders. So for example, reducing food loss and waste, this is what Latka says. When food consumption remains stable, it decreases demand. Agricultural production would decrease as well on this side. That would mean the income of producers and the actors along the supply chain would decrease. They would be losers from the strategy. We wouldn't probably want that, or probably we could say depends. But another pathways could be this one. Food availability could increase by reducing food loss and waste. We could say it might add and be beneficial for food security. I mean, we know that the discussion is more complex about food security, but this would be a positive outcome. Using surplus food for food donation and to charity would also, we would expect increased food security. So also a positive, desirable things. Changes in trade flows could be an effect of changed food availability. And then on the upside, there are financial losses. I mean, people who save food instead of preventing wasting it, they can have financial savings. I mean, they save money. On the other hand, reduction measures generates costs. It costs money to have a policy and implement a policy, to control a policy, but it's not the same people. So the thing is that in this just simple picture that I showed you, to think through a little bit the different mechanisms and winners and losers, it disregards scale. So it's not shown as a global scale, or is it household scale? It doesn't regard this. And the stakeholders are not clear either, but it's a first picture to have a little bit in mind what could be potential results of a reduction, food loss reduction strategy. And on the other hand, it's about, I already talked about this use of animal feed, of surplus food for animal feed. In the studies, they worked on pig feed. So when leftover food or surplus food is used as pig feed, they say that the food feed competition would decrease because there is no virgin food feed, no agricultural production or less dedicated to feed production. That would decrease land use competition. That could decrease natural resource use and environmental impacts. When the food competition is reduced, agricultural production at the end could be reduced as well. And again, we have an impact on income. And the last thing I want to show is, and this is a result of their paper because they did it with a modeling study. They said then when surplus food used as pig feed is cheap, that could be an incentive to increase pig production, to invest more in this sector of agriculture. But to balance diets, they would need to import protein-rich food, soy, for example, which could have an impact on deforestation. And I would also say more pig production would probably mean more pig consumption, and in terms of health outcomes, which is not shown in the picture, which would also need to be added. Well, so, and the last thing, because not to forget it, interactions between a prevention strategy and a valorization strategy are not addressed either, because this hierarchy that I showed you, it in a way says there are priority strategies and less priority, but in reality, it's neither one or the other. It's very often both at the same time or several at the same time. But how do they interact in reality? What are synergies? What are trade-offs? When we reduce food loss and waste by prevention, there is less available as surplus for any valorization. And this is something that has not been addressed either. So the policy thing, I think is really a really important point. And I try to look at it, and I will show you the results of what I found for a case study of Paris. But before, I just want us to remember that the Sustainable Development Goals have this target 12.3. It says by 2030, half of the food waste should be halved. Well, the food waste should be halved at the retail and consumption stage. And at the other stages, that is agricultural production, processing, post-harvest, it should be reduced, but there is no quantitative target. And many countries have this target included in their national policy. France is an example. So we have, again, the same quantitative target. In France, we have also a legal framework which pushes for food loss and waste reduction. This is, I'm sorry because it's in French, I kept the slide in French, but it shows from 2010 on a couple of laws that addressed food loss and waste reduction. And especially since 2016, a couple of laws, they push business to have a contract with charity to donate surplus food. More specifically, they push them to have a contracting, but they do not say a certain amount of food or a certain percentage of food. And we have no idea either how much food actually is donated. We don't know either how much food is wasted, but we know that there is a mandatory request to have a contract with charity. And this is a couple of laws, and this is basically the main pillar of the French food waste policy. It's donation to charity. And next to it, there is, apart from these laws, there are quite a couple of information tools for, we call this mobilization. It's roundtables, it's working groups with stakeholders. It's a lot of things that should engage people and especially the stakeholders to do their contribution to the reduction of food loss and waste. So the question I asked, and this was part of my PhD thesis, is to see not at the national level, but at the more local level. And then I looked at the city of Paris. How do different policies that address food loss and waste interact in between policy fields? It's in this figure here, the policy field of the food policy. But we also have waste policies that address food waste, often less explicitly. They address food waste as bio-waste, as organic waste. And we have other fields of policies less developed, but energy policy, for example. Energy policy also has a look on this biomass for renewable energy production. And we know that, I mean, this is something that I analyzed, that these policies there are policies available at the national level, because I've showed you that on the previous slide. We have policies at regional level, we have policies at intermunicipal level and municipal level. So the city of Paris, it was a case study. Overall, the number in the cases show the number of documents that I analyzed, policy documents that I analyzed, the total of 23. And what I could see from this analysis is that, well, there are many different policies that are relevant for the city of Paris in its ambition to reduce food loss and waste, but they are very badly connected. I mean, the arrows that I showed, they're just an illustration. They are not, in this case, they are not a result. Potential interactions are really scarce. I mean, interactions are really scarce. There's potential, but they're scarce. I can give an example with a municipal composting plan. So the city of Paris has a plan for composting. They don't talk about food loss and waste, that composting bio-waste. This is here in this section, so in the waste policy field and at the municipal level. We could expect here that there is a connection to preventing food waste, because in the end, before composting food, it would make sense to prevent food waste, to make sure that it doesn't end in a compost when it is still edible, when it could have been eaten. But this is something that is not made. There is a complete disconnection between these both, and they are so obvious. And then the next point is that we've seen this at the national level. The policy tools that are chosen, there are soft policies, there is incentives. Some appear as a mandatory framework, but it's not mandatory in the sense that it's controlled, that it's something they really have to comply with. It remains a soft policy. And it addresses mainly consumers at the individual level, but no structural reasons for food waste. And in the end, we must say that we know from the literature that information, awareness raising has limited effects on behavior change. It's important, sure, but it's not enough. And so the main message from this analysis that we really must have doubts with respect of the quantitative target of halving food waste when we look at the policy of the results of the policy analysis, which is not connected, which is something like isolated documents where we might really must doubt about the effectiveness of the policy with respect to the quantitative target, which is halving food waste at this stage of households. And I think basically this is what brings me to the conclusions. So just to wrap up what I said is food loss and waste monitoring is important. We still have problems. There are still problems with the data, the methodology, but it doesn't hinder to implement policies and to move on with action. The sustainability benefits and especially the trade-offs must really be better understood. They probably should better inform the food loss and waste reduction strategies and not only consider something like the masses, but also consider the environmental impact of the specific foods that are lost and wasted, include costs, market feedback, these rebounds effect that we have just seen as pathways without having any results. But I think this is the way to go. Well, Latka makes a suggestion in their paper because they say the trade-offs are involved in reducing food waste. I mean, shouldn't we think of something like a non-zero level of societally desirable food waste because there are winners and losers? I mean, could we completely ignore the losers? This is something we could think about. Is there not a zero level of food waste that should be the ultimate goal, but something less ambitious, maybe more including, integrated? And in the end, what are the synergies and the trade-offs between prevention and valorization, especially because in these valorization policies, and when we think of animal feed and when we think of energy production, the demand for biomass tends rather to increase and could limit any prevention strategies. And what would be a good way to jointly design these policies for best outcome? For me, these are the open questions that I would like to submit to you for discussions. I don't have the answers.